Ukraine said it shot down a Russian transport plane over Russian soil, but there is a sting in the tail amid unconfirmed Russian claims that the plane had 65 Ukrainian prisoners of war on board.
Kharkiv again, and this is a sting again. We're in Kharkiv again.
My name is Jerome Starkey. I'm the defence editor for The Sun, and this is Frontline, your latest roundup of the most important news from the war in Ukraine. We're going to start today with the ongoing uncertainty over that IL-76 Russian cargo plane that was shot down over Russian soil in rural Belgorod region this week. Now, initially, Ukraine claimed responsibility through anonymous sources, claimed responsibility for shooting down this aircraft, which it said was carrying S-300 missiles. Now, these are air defense missiles normally, but which have been repurposed and regularly used by Russia to hit targets inside Ukraine, particularly targets in Kharkiv region and Kharkiv city, which neighbours Belgorod, where this plane crashed. Now, footage released across social media appeared to show the plane crashing in a ball of flames, and Moscow was quick to say that all 74 people on board were killed. The Russian claim is potentially a body blow for Ukraine, that 65 Ukrainian prisoners of war were on board. Russia says, as well as those 65, there were 6 crew and 3 military escorts who were escorting those prisoners of war for a planned prisoner swap. Now, what do we know? There was a prisoner swap due to take place on January 24th, but Ukraine said it was called off. They've also said that there was no request from the Russians to secure the airspace, which is something Ukrainian officials say the Russians have done in the past when they've been transporting prisoners for a prisoner swap. Now, the evening of this plane crashing, President Zelensky called for an international investigation. And that came a few hours after Ukraine's armed forces issued a statement, seemingly in response to these claims about the prisoners of war, saying that it targets Russian transport planes because Russian transport planes are bringing munitions to the front line. And it said, the armed forces said, or rather the general staff said in this statement, that there had been a spike in attacks against Kharkiv, which was directly reflected in an increase in aircraft activity, cargo aircraft activity, bringing these missiles to the region. But it did not specifically claim responsibility, and it did not specifically address the Russian claims. Now, we're going to stay with this for a bit longer because it really is sort of dominating the conversation in and about Ukraine at the moment. Today, a spokesman for Ukraine's GUR military intelligence service has spoken more about this aircraft. He said the plane was due to carry Russian VIPs, but the FSB intelligence service banned them from traveling at the last minute. He also said that rescue workers were banned from getting to the site of the crash to investigate the debris. One would expect, if a plane had crashed with so many people on board, that there would be evidence of the bodies. Ukrainians remember the aftermath of the MH17 Malaysia Airlines plane that was shot down over Ukraine, and many hundreds of bodies scattered across a huge area when that plane crashed. Andrew Yusov, the spokesman for Ukraine's GUR intelligence service, also said something interesting. He said that there were only 5 bodies taken from the scene to the local morgue. Now, that would appear to cast doubt over the Russian claims of so many dead. But he did also raise the awful prospect that Russia may have been using prisoners of war as a human shield. Now, the head of Ukraine's Air Force has called Moscow's claims rampant propaganda. More information will no doubt come out over this, whether or not this is indeed a true claim by the Russians to have killed these prisoners of war, or perhaps a classic example of Russian deliberate misinformation and propaganda. One thing is certain: it has sown a seed of doubt that perhaps this strike on a Russian aircraft may have backfired for Ukraine. Of course, it comes just a week after Ukraine shot down the A-50 Beriev spy plane. Interesting, that's a variant of the same IL-76 jet aircraft. Ukraine also inflicted damage on a command and control aircraft over the Sea of Azov. So, builds on Ukrainian successes hitting Russian hardware. A horrible sting in the tail if indeed they have killed 65 of their own prisoners of war. The next thing we're going to talk about today is activity in Russian courts. There have been two big verdicts just moments ago. The first is in the case of Daria Trepova. She was sentenced to 27 years for what a St. Petersburg court said was her part in the killing of Vladan Tatarsky, a pro-war blogger. He was killed last April after Daria handed him a bust of himself which contained an explosive. Now, she told the court she believed she was handing him a tracking device and a bugging device. She understood she was working for a Ukrainian contact, but claimed she did not know that it was a bomb. Some 50 people were also injured in that explosion in a cafe in St. Petersburg. The other verdict that's come through today is in the case of Igor Girkin, a former Russian FSB agent, intelligence agent, and military commander who was one of the leaders of the 2014 Russian-backed separatist uprising in Donbass in eastern Ukraine. Now, Girkin has famously been convicted in absentia and sentenced to life in prison by a Dutch court for his part in the shooting down of that Malaysian flight MH17, which I mentioned a moment ago. That killed 298 people. He was not put on trial for his part in that. In fact, he was put on trial essentially because of his criticisms of Vladimir Putin and of the armed forces. He'd become a very outspoken sort of ultra-nationalist, but pro-war blogger who was nonetheless an outspoken critic of the way Russia has been executing the war. Finally, today we're going to talk a little bit about the war on infrastructure, which continues on both sides. We've seen attacks by Ukrainian drones against an oil depot in Russia, not far from Vladimir Putin's famously lavish and luxurious Black Sea dacha. Dacha doesn't really do it justice. It's a palace on the eastern edge of the Black Sea. Equally, we've seen Russian strikes against a fuel line, a gas line in Kharkiv region. Both sides continuing to try and degrade each other's infrastructure, as ultimately, as we heard, that this has become a war of materiel and resources. They're trying to degrade each other's ability and will to fight. NATO's Secretary General said this week that the war had become a war of ammunition, and he stressed the importance to NATO member states to helping to arm Ukraine as Russia turns to its allies, Iran, North Korea, and slightly more discreetly to China to keep its guns firing. Final topic I wanted to address this week is the role of Hungary within NATO and the European Union. Viktor Orban is due to meet Sweden's Prime Minister in order to try and reach some agreement in order to approve Sweden's joining of NATO. Now that's potentially a significant breakthrough. Turkey had been the obstacle objecting to Sweden joining NATO. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Turkey's leader, has indicated that he will ratify that. So Hungary remains the last obstacle. Significant because, of course, Hungary has also been the EU member state which has vetoed plans to give Ukraine 100 billion euros in aid. But more good news on that. Finland's foreign minister has said that she is confident that Viktor Orban will not veto the EU aid plan at a summit of EU leaders due to take place next week. As ever, thank you very much for your questions. If you do have them, and if you're watching on YouTube, please leave them in the comments below, and we'll endeavour to answer them next time. Question number one is, how are the Iranian drones, these are the Shahid kamikaze drones made in Iran, making their way into Russia? These have proved a really central part of Russia's almost nightly blitzes on targets across Ukraine. It's a good question. What we know comes from a briefing by John Kirby, the US National Security Council spokesman. He said that these drones are shipped across the Caspian Sea, so from Iran across the Caspian Sea into Russia and then to the front line. So a relatively simple supply chain. There's also been speculation that Russia will try and start manufacturing under license these Iranian products on Russian soil, but unclear how advanced those preparations are. One of the questions is, can NATO say goodbye to Hungary? We've slightly touched earlier on the reasons why NATO might want to do that. Viktor Orban has been resisting a sort of general consensus within NATO for Sweden to join. Orban, Hungary's leader, has also been the fly in the ointment, the veto, the obstacle to the EU plan to supply that 100 billion euros worth of aid to Ukraine. The short answer, can NATO expel Hungary? No, there is not a mechanism within NATO's founding treaty for expelling members. Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General, has been asked about this, and he was clear there isn't a mechanism. He was also clear that he would not put forward a mechanism because NATO effectively works by consensus. So the only way that a mechanism for expelling members would get introduced would be by unanimous vote, and that seems very unlikely to happen. A question about the Beriev A-50s. Are any of the other 8 airworthy? It's a good question. These are the early warning spy planes, spy and surveillance planes, one of which was shot down over the Sea of Azov. British Ministry of Defence, in its intelligence update, said that Ukraine had 8 remaining. One of them did return to the Sea of Azov a few days after that successful strike by Ukraine's armed forces, so we know at least one is airworthy. You know, in a fleet of 8, you would expect some to be in maintenance at any one time, but Russia is demonstrating that at least one of them is working, and we'd expect to see more. And finally, is there any update on the F-16s for Ukraine? Well, we know that the pilots continue to be trained in Romania. Ukrainian pilots continue to be trained in Romania and elsewhere. The Netherlands, Denmark and the United States have all said they are willing to provide these planes. Interestingly, there has been an update actually today from a spokesman for Ukraine's Air Force, and his message was, whilst the planes might be ready, actually some of the other infrastructure and preparations that need to be put in place before the planes arrive, is not yet complete. And that could be refueling, that could be mechanisms to make sure the runways are actually good enough quality for these planes. F-16s are sort of more sensitive than Soviet-era jets in terms of the debris on the runway, because they can suck it in, hoover it in to their engines and do themselves serious damage. So there are preparations that need to take place. Nonetheless, US officials have said they do expect the first combat flights of these jets, of these F-16s, to take place this year. Thank you again for watching or listening. If you are watching on YouTube, then please don't forget to answer your questions in the comments below, and do subscribe to The Sun. If you're listening, then please don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcast to Frontline with me, Jerome Starkey.